Commission meeting for May 30th. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Ahmed.
Here.
Commissioner Curtis.
Here.
Commissioner Kuznick.
Here.
Vice Chair Wallace.
I'm here.
Chair Albert.
Here.
Councilmember Rubio. Here. Councilmember Veros. Councilmember Perkins.
Here.
Vice Mayor Armstrong.
Here.
And Mayor Hudson.
Here. Okay, sounds like the gang's all here. Gary, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so that does want to do that. Okay, unfinished business. This is a joint City Council Planning Commission public hearing. The draft general plan 2040 updates. Cindy, you have the staff report. I assume that's why you're walking up here.
I do.
Staff
Thank
report,
you.
Cindy Yee.
Well, thank you and good evening. I'm glad to be here on our fifth Tuesday of May and really excited to start our public hearing process for the general plan update. I have a PowerPoint presentation this afternoon, and we can certainly take
Oh, yeah. Got feedback?
going to wait 1 second for the technical
No, we're getting feedback.
difficulties.
Feedback.
Testing. We're good. Okay, well, thank you again. So this evening we'll start our public hearing process for the general plan update. As you will all recall, there's been a lot of work and a lot of time spent on the update, and we've done the project in a series of meetings and steps. City staff that's working on the general plan update is Debbie Chamberlain, our director, Lauren Barr, our planning manager, myself as the project manager, and then Ryan Driscoll, our associate planner, all have put the project together for you.
Gang of three.
We've also partnered with a number of consultants who's working on various elements of the update. We have traffic, environmental, housing, economic, and general project managers that are assisting us with our general plan update. Tonight's meeting is really the kickoff for our first public hearing of the general plan update. As you all recall, Measure G requires a number of meetings to take place before any decisions can be made on the general plan. And so tonight there will be no decisions that will be made on the applications, but there are a series of applications that are part of this project. We have the general plan update itself to the chapters within the general plan, along with a climate action plan and rezoning, pre-zoning, specific plan amendments, and environmental applications that are all considered part of the project. After tonight's meeting, we'll continue the public hearing to a future joint City Council Planning Commission meeting and to continue the conversation on the update. And so just starting with really quick history, we started this process back in the summer of 2021, actually almost a year to the day where we started this, 2 years to the day where we started the general plan update. We've had 16 study sessions and community workshops, 13 presentations before city committees and commissions, and attended 5 community events during that 2-year period. because of timing requirements of state law, the city completed the housing element update portion of the general plan in January of this year and received state certification of our housing element in February. And so we are completing the remainder of the general plan update and then followed by key actions such as the climate action update and the associated applications. And I know you're all familiar with what a general plan is, but just for the viewing audience, refresher, it is required by state law that the city have a general plan. It guides the city's long-term decisions and addresses a broad range of topics that are organized in elements. Those are the various chapters that are attached to your staff report. It articulates the long-term vision for the city over the next 20 years. And so our general plan will carry us through the planning period of 2040. It's a multi-year process that's going to be required. Again, because of different timing requirements, there are updates to the element, environmental review that needs to be done, and then all of the other pieces that go towards implementing the general plan. As far as environmental review, as part of this project, we will be preparing an environmental impact report. That is a draft that we're currently working on right now. We did hold a scoping session last year with the Planning Commission on the environmental document, and so we are moving forward with getting the draft EIR prepared and expect that to be released later this summer. And then just some quick information related to demographics. A lot of the planning that we're doing is really based on the projected growth that the city foresees through 2040. And through various data sources, we've determined that in 2040, population and housing units will increase. Housing units will ultimately drive the population increase. The expectation is about 10,000 additional units that we are projecting to add from 2022 through 2040. That will span 2 housing element cycles and then some. So not only the units that we're planning for through our current planning housing element cycle, but also projected housing growth that we expect in our next 7th cycle would be through 2031 and beyond. Population is basically just a number of people per household that we expect driven by the additional housing units that are going to be added to the city. And so it's a factor of 2.9 or so persons per household per unit that we expect, and that's where you're getting your population growth. And then jobs is data that's provided to us by the regional governing agency that identifies the potential for job growth in San Ramon. So as part of the general plan update, there are 11 elements within the general plan. One of those elements have already been updated and adopted, as I mentioned, the housing element. And then the remainder elements that are attached to your staff report this evening, these are the 10 additional elements that are being modified. Within these 10, there are also one state requirement to address environmental justice. That's done through the land use element. So in your staff report, there's a summary of the 10 different elements and what each element is responsible for. It includes background and narratives for each of the topics. It identifies broad guiding policies, and then there are a series of implementing policies that achieve that guiding policy. And ultimately, the city's goals and objectives that are identified in the general plan, we have various tools to implement those goals. We have the climate action plan, the zoning ordinance, our specific plans, and all the policies that are within the general plan that guide how we're going to achieve our stated goals and objectives in the general plan. In your attachment, you'll find a track change version that shows the current general plan that's adopted, we refer to as the general plan 2035, and then the proposed changes to the general plan to the 2040 version. And those edits represent a number of public comments, engagement with our committees and commissions, various staff members in different departments that have all worked together to incorporate text changes that you see in the document. Some of the elements that I just wanted to make sure I highlight this evening, the land use element. We spent our last planning commission talking quite a bit about land use element policies and also general growth management policies. But land use element is one of the key chapters within the general plan that really drives the need for policies in traffic, in noise. So a lot of the policies in the other elements kind of stem from land use and giving that direction of what growth is going to look like, and then how is that growth going to be managed in the various elements. So land use elements contain policies and goals that shape the city's land use and development decisions to maintain a strong community identity and character for the next 20 years. This update to the land use element will update the history and evolution of the city since 2018. That's the last time the land use element was updated. There are a number of diagrams and classifications that are also need to be updated. There's updates to the projected build out population and employment based on our expected housing and job growth, and then updates to the policies itself. So I would consider one of the most important, if not most important elements of the general plan. And then on the partner to the land use element is really the map that shows the proposed land use design of the city, not only the city, but the planning area as a whole. The city proposes a series of changes to those land use and zoning maps in order to ensure internal consistency with our housing element, as well as to match kind of the long-term goals of the city for land use designations, and in particular within our specific plan areas that we're going to need to make sure that we align with our housing element. There's also some general cleanup for internal consistency purposes. And then on the map, you'll see on the last page of your maps, there is one unincorporated island that exists along Deerwood Road. And the local agency formation commission has asked with our next general plan update to make sure that we address that and pre-zone it so that that island could be annexed into the city. And then the fifth reason for changes to the land use map is also to identify alternatives to the general plan land use, in particular associated with the formerly Chevron Office Park that's currently renamed to the Orchards. So that property will be, because it has a general plan application that's already has been filed for that location. We've included some alternative maps that show what that land use could potentially look like at the Orchards. And then we've also discussed some changes that we would, the commission and council have been interested in seeing as far as our retail shopping centers and how we'll further the goals of preserving retail shopping. And so some of those alternatives are identified in the series of maps that are contained in the staff report. And so the next part of this presentation includes all of the maps that were presented to the Planning Commission at their meeting on May 16th. And they represent specific snapshots of where land use changes and zoning changes are going to be happening within the city. So in Chapter 4, there's a land use map that has it at a very small scale that's quite difficult to read. What we've created are these cut sheets that identify each of the parcels that have land use or zoning changes so that you can see what's happening with each site. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the existing condition. And then on the right-hand side is the proposed land use designation or the zoning designation that the city is proposing to change that to. The first couple of maps are tied to the Doherty Valley. I won't go through all of these, but certainly if you have questions specifically to any one of these, we can revisit this. But a lot of the Doherty Valley changes are related to what I would consider some cleanup or making sure that the specific plan designation or the zoning designation aligns with the general plan designation. It's over the course of the development of Doherty Valley, there have been some modifications to land uses to the specific plan. And because of those changes, some of that has not been captured in the land use element. And so this is the opportunity to make those changes and clean up some of these parcels. And then as we move from Doherty Valley along Bollinger Canyon Road, there are a number of changes that we're making related to housing opportunity sites. These are all the sites that we've identified as housing opportunity sites that have the ability to include housing units that have been designated in our housing element to meet our regional housing needs allocation. And so this site here, for example, the Club Sport tennis court slide represents one of those changes for the housing opportunity sites. You'll see that really the only change that is visible on this map is that on the zoning district proposed, we would be identifying a residential overlay, which would signal that residential land use and zoning would be allowed on that parcel. And we've taken that that overlay designation and applied that to a number of our housing opportunity sites. As you'll see, for example, this one at Canyon View Dining Hall, it is a housing opportunity site. What's changing in this series of maps is the zoning district proposed will have a residential overlay that will match the proposed housing opportunity site. So when you see that residential overlay designation on those parcels, it's a signal that it's a housing opportunity site. It was identified as a good site for meeting our regional housing needs, and will apply the zoning standards of that residential district to those parcels. This next map then moves from Bollinger West to the city, what we call the city core. The city core is, we've talked about for quite some time over the course of the last 2 years. This is related to the repeal of the North Camino Ramon specific plan. On the right-hand side, really faintly, you'll see a dotted purple line that represents where the North Camino Ramon specific plan is. That plan, as part of this process, would be repealed, and then we would replace the zoning and the land use designation with essentially what we call conventional land use designations, rather than relying on a specific plan. For land use, we would just be using the land use that's designated in the general plan and the zoning ordinance. And these changes represent all of the conversations that we've had during the course of our housing element discussion, where we'll be applying mixed use, but a commercial or a residential emphasis within each of these neighborhoods. One of the alternatives that you'll see on this next slide is based on the new application that the city has for redesignating the Orchards parcel and the adjacent parcel on Bishop Ranch 1 to downtown mixed use. That's the application that's been filed. And so this is an opportunity, because we are in the process of doing our general plan update, to consider the change to the downtown mixed use in the southern area as a land use alternative. Should the city be interested in incorporating that as part of our general plan update, we could evaluate that as an alternative. One of the other changes that you see on the right-hand side of your screen, the downtown mixed use south on the southern portion in that kind of darker purple is the one change to the alternatives map. And then on the northern part of the screen, where it's labeled retail shopping, the darker orange, that's also a change from the previous map. The alternative would be if we have the opportunity to add downtown mixed use, which includes a residential component within that land use. One of the opportunities we have is to look at other sites within the city that are not housing opportunity sites that we could redesignate as retail shopping or something that would further the city's goals of preserving retail or enhancing our retail centers. And so I'm just going to do a screen flip from before to what's proposed, and you'll see that darker orange has been incorporated on the northern part of the alternatives map. The primary reason for that change and the pairing of those two changes for the downtown mixed use and then establishing the retail shopping at the shopping centers is really the requirement that the city has to look at no net loss. And in order to offset the residential units that have been identified in mixed use and change those to retail, the city also has to consider whether or not we can accommodate those that potential housing on alternative sites. And because currently the Chevron and BR1 properties in the downtown mixed use is office, they currently have 0 units associated with it, housing units associated with it. We could take this opportunity to take the mixed use on some of our retail shopping centers that are non-housing opportunity sites, take those sites and convert those to retail shopping if the city desires. But we would have to find a receiver site essentially for the units that we're taking out to make sure that there's no net loss of residential units. So that's one of the reasons for the pairing of those land use alternatives is essentially the downtown mixed use south could be considered a receiver site for the residential units that would be taking off of those mixed use sites. This next slide, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the marketplace parcels. The change here primarily is the designation to mixed use commercial emphasis. And so right now the city has a mixed use, a general mixed use that is pretty broad. It doesn't define exactly how we want each of those sites to look like. Some sites we would prefer to see more commercial forward, and some may be better suited as residential forward mixed use sites. And the residential forward meaning that there are little less obligations for commercial development on the mixed use sites. You could have a combination of those land uses, but it would on the commercial emphasis, it would primarily be a commercial emphasis on the within this site. And then with the residential, you may see more residential units associated with the residential emphasis site. So when you see the designation of commercial emphasis or residential emphasis, that's really the goal there, is to have a signals to the property owner or developers that there are specific development standards that are going to encourage the development of more commercial on mixed use or more residential on those mixed use sites. And you'll see that in various different iterations of those mixed use. So again, this is another alternative slide that has been identified. As you know, the Marketplace Shopping Center already has a residential development that's been approved, but the remainder of that parcel is still designated as mixed use. There's an opportunity here to redesignate the remainder portion of the shopping center as retail shopping and community commercial on the zoning side. Again, that's a potential trade-off for creating that downtown mixed use south. And then these next couple of slides is, again, making sure that we we identify where we see residential emphasis or commercial emphasis. So these next couple of slides here, this is South Saramone, that specifically identifies that residential emphasis, where we think residential would be appropriate as one of the primary uses within that mixed use. And then as we move south over to Saramone Valley Boulevard, you'll see again the change here, identifying this site as a housing opportunity site. The residential overlay is what is the key here to identify that there is a potential for residential, even though the primary land use could be public or semi-public. And then Country Club Village, this is another one of the shopping centers that is a housing opportunity site on just a portion of this shopping center. There's an opportunity here where we could take the commercial emphasis portion that's not a housing opportunity site and replace the land use with retail shopping. And so by taking off the mixed use designation, retail shopping would no longer include a residential opportunity for that site unless it were to be rezoned or redesignated after the city made this change. So the expectation, if we were to adopt what's proposed as shown on this slide, is that the blue portions of this parcel could have that option for residential development on that blue portion, but the red portion of the parcel would be preserved for retail shopping. And so again, because it's not a housing opportunity site on the red side, we have the ability to incorporate this alternative if the city would like. Shifting back to the west side, these are again housing opportunity sites that you see in a number of these slides. This one here is now moving to the west side, again, beyond west of West Side Drive. One of the previous housing opportunity sites that's commonly referred to as the Gelderman properties, that's currently identified as Hillside Residential. It's actually a parcel that's located outside of city limits. And so as part of the general plan update, we're proposing to designate the future planning area as open space. One of the primary reasons for that is because of the central goal of putting housing within the core of the city. A lot of our housing opportunity sites are now within the city core. And so because of that, there's an opportunity here for a redesignation on our land use map as open space. And then these last couple of slides here are related to the Saramone Village specific plan. Just a bit of a quick history here. When we adopted the Saramone Village specific plan back in 2020, the general plan had identified the entirety of Saramone Village specific plan as mixed use. And then we relied on this Saramone Village specific plan to narrow down specifically how we saw each site being developed in the future. Since the adoption of that specific plan, state law has changed in such that anything that has a mixed use designation has the potential for residential. And so you can't just rely on the specific plan to guide land use design for those parcels. And so as we all know, the Sarah Village specific plan wasn't expected to have residential units on every parcel. It was really meant to be specific to what the specific plan designated. And so as part of this opportunity, because we are adding housing opportunity sites and adding residential capacity within the city's core, it's an opportunity for us to change the land use designation from mixed use within the specific plan and designated to align with the San Ramon Village specific plan land use. And so, for example, here you'll see this over the next couple of slides. On the upper left-hand side, the existing general plan land use shows mixed use for that entire portion north of Freya Preserve Parkway. The expectation is that with the land use change, that will become mixed commercial, which is a mixed, it's a non-residential land use. It doesn't mean that you can't have residential within that area. It only means that you can have residential in the areas that are designated within the specific plan or the housing opportunity sites in the zoning district. And so some of these parcels have a residential overlay in the specific plan. Those will continue to carry forward in the specific plan. But the general plan isn't driving the land use pattern. It's the specific plan now that will be driving what those parcels will be developed as. And then this map just shows south of Freya Preserve Parkway along Deerwood Road. Same situation here with mixed use. We're taking the opportunity here to designate it specifically what we expected the land use to look like to match the general plan to match the specific plan. And so you'll see that similarities here, instead of just a blanket mixed use, everything is being identified as what the specific plan had expected those land uses to be. And then we're still in the San Ramon Village specific plan here. This is north of Crow Canyon Road, along Old Crow Canyon Crow Canyon Road. Instead of the mixed use, now we have this update to mixed commercial and where high density residential is expected, it's now actually identifying that in the land use map. I do want to point out just one change here that was discussed as part of the specific plan update. You'll see on the park designation has been reduced from the existing to the proposed. And as part of the specific plan update, this was one of the discussion points that we had, that at the future general plan update, because Twin Creeks Drive extension is no longer part of the city's plan, it no longer requires that the parcel that is at the T intersection of Twin Creeks and Crow Canyon be a park site. And so we are changing back the land use designation to commercial. It already has 2 commercial buildings that are on it. And because there's no roadway that's going to be going through that, it seemed like it would be an appropriate time to bring it back to the mixed commercial designation. And then now moving out of the specific plan area to the west on Crow Canyon Road. Again, these are all a series of changes that will align the land use to what was expected for each of those parcels. And so some of these parcels are housing opportunity sites. It now recognizes that they will be mixed use with the residential emphasis. The ones that had the blanket mixed use that we did not expect to be residential now have been redesignated to the retail shopping. That larger red retail shopping is Home Depot, just for reference, if you're not familiar with the location of where that is. And then this last slide is related to that pre-zoning that needs to happen for the unincorporated island. It's a 0.13 acre parcel that is a remnant piece that's owned by the homeowners association that just never got caught in the annexation for the city. And so as part of the cleanup, that's going to be part of the applications that are going to be processed with this update. And the new land use, once it does get incorporated into the city, would be open space. And so with that, we're on our last slide here with next steps. After tonight's public hearing, we'll continue to work on the update and refining the general plan based on the comments that we receive, along with any changes to the maps or the zoning ordinance and the specific plans. We have our public hearings beginning this evening and expect to have public hearings through this fall. The release of the draft environmental impact report will be released late this summer, and we'll start that 45-day public review period of the draft EIR, and that'll be timed to when we hold our public hearings, and we'll start to track as we get to a discussion of adoption or recommendation for adoption. And then ultimately the city council will make that decision on adopting the update. But we look at this evening as really the kickoff point of getting comments on the general plan. So I know it's quite a large document, a lot of maps that you've received. Similarly to the housing element where we had a kickoff for when the document was released. This is a good opportunity to kind of spend the summer looking through, making edits and making some notes about things that you'd like to edit or incorporate into the general plan. And don't feel like you need to make all of those comments this evening, but we'll continue to take those through the public hearing process. So I think with that, that's my last slide. I can take questions now if you'd like, or.
Thank you, Cindy. I will ask the city council first if they have any comments or questions, then I'll turn it over to Chair Alpert to check in with his commissioners. Council?
I have no questions or comments at this time. I'll make my comments after public comment.
Unless somebody. Sure.
Yeah,
Hello,
just a
Marisol.
question.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Good to see you.
Thank you. I was just wondering, so like, were there like sort of studies done to kind of assess, we have pretty sizable workforce of ours, about 73% are driving out to go to work elsewhere, right? And with about almost like 39, almost 40% having to commute over 45 minutes each way, right? So I'm wondering, like, when you guys kind of laid out this initial map, was there some kind of like study done to try to assess, or analysis done to try to assess, like, how can we bring some of those jobs more here and try to, reduce that, be a commuter city? Like, how can we reduce that so that it's, obviously it improves the quality of life for our residents, but also reduces traffic, frankly. So have you guys incorporated any of that? Because I see there's a lot of retail, but I'm just sort of wondering, was that balance sort of made to make sure we have, right fit?
Sure. So I wouldn't say there is a specific study that was done to examine how many people commute in or commute out and where it is that they're necessarily going as part of this update. But as a whole, when we're looking at land uses and the land use pattern within the city, creating a balance of the various land uses that would still retain enough of the office to support the new housing units that are being constructed, and then also the retail that's necessary to support the potential employment growth and the residential growth. And so when we've laid out this land use plan, it does identify as part of that, and what was studied more kind of generally is how do we create jobs within the city that then support the residences that, or the population that currently works in the city, and be able to try to get us to a better balance of jobs to housing, so that people are relying less on having to commute out, and ultimately by creating the jobs and the pairing of the residential units so that more of those people have the opportunity to be able to have a job in the city rather than having to leave.
Is there a way we can get some of that information so that we can, develop something around that?
I think there's general information because the pandemic has changed a lot about how where jobs are based or how people are working. A lot of that still is relatively new information. But what we have heard is that there's less of a demand for the traditional office. There's much smaller office spaces that can support the workers that may be coming into the office once or twice a week. But may have the luxury of being able to work from home. So that office space doesn't necessarily have to be larger. And so when we looked at least the office park and where we're putting the residential units, that was done as part of our interviews with property owners, what they're interested in, what they see in terms of the market for jobs and where workers are coming from. And so part of that analysis of the balance of which parcels are going to be office, which ones will be mixed use, that's part of the development of this land use map that you see in front of you.
Okay. Thank you.
Before I turn it over to Chair Alpert, let me ask one question. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I had a few questions too.
Okay, my question is going to be, is Camp Park still going to be mentioned in our general plan? The
Um,
small sliver that we have for Contra Costa County.
So it is in our planning area, and so it will continue to be on our maps.
Good.
But yeah, there's no changes necessarily to that planning designation.
Sorry, Vice Mayor.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah, Cindy, I had a few questions. So, and I understand, the whole Measure G thing, and we got to have the 3 public hearings for the council and the planning commission, and this is one of those. I just want to make sure, I understand what feedback you're really looking for tonight. And kind of what the expectation is for this tonight's meeting in particular. One of your recommendations was that we're going to continue the public hearing to another joint city council and planning commission session. And what I'm a little bit concerned about is that, we on the city council side, can provide our kind of comments and things like that at sort of the 50,000 foot level. But I think the planning commission really needs to take some deep dive into this, each of the different elements, the different policies, whether that's element by element or policy by policy. And I don't see us doing that in the joint session. So what are you really expecting, at this meeting and in the future joint meetings?
Sure. No, great question. This is really the first time I think the public is receiving the zoning changes and the land use map changes. We've done direct notices to all of the property owners that are on those list of maps that are changing. So this would be a great opportunity for the public to weigh in on those changes. But we've also introduced these alternatives in the maps that would be great to get some feedback on this evening about which direction we'd like to go with those land use alternatives. That way we can start studying those as part of the environmental impact that might be associated with the change to the alternatives. Really this evening, if there are general policies or comments, I think the narratives and the background information is relatively straightforward as far as just the progression of what's taken place since the last time we've updated the general plan. But the policies, we have before at least this evening's meeting, we have spent some time with the Planning Commission, both on the land use, the environment, the land use, the growth management, and the economic elements. earlier this year to try to get a preview of those policies, what those are going to look like, and have gotten feedback from those groups. And then we also brought the policies to our transportation advisory committees, our open space policies to the open space committee, the parks element policies to the parks commission. So a lot of what feedback that we've received thus far has been incorporated into the draft that you see in front of you. So we have done some of that legwork as far as the necessary or requested changes to the policies in the document that you've seen. Really what we're looking for, perhaps at the next meeting when we have a bigger conversation about, are these changes reflective of what you've told us thus far in the document, and have we captured all of those changes that you've that we've been discussing at the various levels? But we will, as part of our process, be going back to the Planning Commission. They're heavily involved in the certification of the environmental document. We'll have separate public hearings with the Planning Commission. And then eventually, when all of those comments are received and they're at a Planning Commission is at a point where they're comfortable with making a recommendation to the City Council for adoption or a vote on the general plan update, that will then be our next series of meetings when we bring it back to the council. But this is really just what I would consider the kickoff of comments on the draft.
Okay. Okay. One of the things you mentioned was on maybe getting some feedback on the alternate maps and things like that. Are you looking to just get feedback on that, or at the end of this process, are we going to include, two maps in there, a primary and an alternate in there as to what could happen in the future?
Sure.
Or you're looking to just at the end of this process, it'll just be one map? So
I think this evening, if we can get some conversations about the alternatives and what direction you see the city going as far as land uses, we are planning on carrying forward with the general plan map that's attached to Chapter 4 of your document. If the city is interested in incorporating these alternatives, we would be looking at that as part of our environmental review process. And you potentially could see two maps at the end when we've finished our environmental review to make sure that you can evaluate what the impacts are going to be if we were to go with the primary map that's in Chapter 4, or if we were to go with the alternative maps, what that environmental impact will look like, and ultimately make a decision on that.
Okay. Mayor, if I may, I've got a few more
No, keep
smaller
going.
questions. Okay. There's a reference in here under the I think it was a traffic and circulation element on measures of effectiveness and levels of service, and I kind of missed the difference between the two of those. Maybe that's been in there in the past, and I just didn't understand the difference there.
So our traffic and circulation element, Chapter 5 of the general plan, there are still references to level of service, and level of service typically is measuring delay either at an intersection,
Right.
and how long it takes for somebody to travel through that intersection. From the environmental side, a lot of our review on impacts for development is now focused on vehicle miles traveled, or VMTs.
Right.
But as a city, we still want to include a policy on how much delay we would like to see in terms of level of service in our intersections. And that just helps us continue to evaluate as part of a project, and not only the vehicle miles traveled, but what is the potential impact to level of service. And so you'll still see those in the policies of the general plan for level of service. And that's essentially a means for us to continue to evaluate as part of any development project what that level of service of impacts are going to be. But those are now considered really more guidelines, because they're not mandated to maintain those levels of service as standards. They're going to be guiding policies.
But the measures of effectiveness or how we're going to evaluate those levels of
Exactly,
service?
correct,
Okay,
right.
all right. Okay. The next question I have was on, we have the climate action plan and we've got the air quality and greenhouse gas element. And I've always kind of been a little bit confused on why we're doing the two different things. I know there's a state requirement for one or the other, or maybe both. But what's sort of the main difference between the two different things that we're updating right now?
So the air quality and greenhouse gas element, which is chapter 12 of your general plan, that essentially creates the guiding policies for the city and the goals and objectives that we have for air quality and greenhouse gas emissions. It's the city's overarching goals for air quality and greenhouse gas. The climate action plan is a separate document, and it's really the implementation document that will implement the goals of the air quality and greenhouse gas element. And so you can look at the element as being what sets the goals and objectives, and then the climate action plan as being the implementation tools. So that might be what measures we have to take on the building construction side or the electric vehicle infrastructure side in order to be able to meet our emissions goals or air quality goals.
Yeah, but it can't all be in just one element or one document. It's got to be in the two separate ones.
Typically, only because climate action plan sort of is a living document. We update the general plan very irregularly. And so maybe every 5 years or so, but the climate action plan, we are doing biannual reviews of the climate action plan to see if we're meeting those goals. And it gives us an opportunity to evaluate if there's something that needs to be done in the climate action plan to get us closer to meeting our goals.
Okay, here's an easy one. I saw in their reference to Athey Lot Park. What is that? I mean, I know like we've got Henry Ranch and we've got Woodlot, some other things that haven't been built, but I've never seen Athey Lot. I wasn't familiar
Let's see.
with where or what that was.
There's so many things in my brain. That's
Isn't it the
one.
stagecoach crossing on Old Crocaine Road?
I'll have to. I wish that was an easy one. Ryan is on vacation. He did.
If you pull up on your
Yes.
next to last or your, near the end of your maps,
Oh,
you still want, no,
no, yes, I know what you're talking about.
there you go.
I'll have to double check. There's a couple of different names that we refer to as,
Property,
it's actually not the Culligan's
it's next
property.
to
It's
it.
just adjacent. So
it's next to it.
if I recall correctly, what do you happen to know what the acreage identified on Athey is?
W-
2 acres? Yeah.
Well,
Then-
it has some APNs with it. It's not critical. I
Okay.
just thought you might have it.
I believe that the Athey lot is this parcel here in green. It's the park site. It's actually a city-owned parcel that was years ago purchased by the city for future park site. And so it's just an undeveloped park that currently exists within the Saramone Village specific plan area.
Okay.
And
and-
it happens to be where the old wagon crossing.
That's where that was. Okay, I'm
Yeah,
familiar.
wagon crossings.
I know that area. So, and remind me, also, there's a couple references in there when talking about Country Club. And I think on the Home Depot map, there's the community commercial. What is that again? That definition?
Sure. So retail shopping is the land use designation in the general plan. And what implements the retail shopping are various different zoning designations. The community commercial is just a signal that it's a retail shopping land use. So community commercial is typically your shopping centers they all used to be community commercial before they were redesignated to mixed use when we last did our our housing element in the fourth cycle. And so it's similar to community commercial currently exists where Bollinger Canyon Way, the across from Club Sport, that's community commercial right now.
Yeah.
One of these maps here.
Place you have to drive past to get to the golf course. And the brewery.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. So adjacent to Canyon View Dining Hall. So that's an example of what your traditional community commercial would look like.
Okay, okay. Well, and then the final one, which is, you know, when we were approving the housing element, we made some comments about, you know, really diving deep into the definitions of mixed use and, you know, objectifying the general plan and things like that. And I know there's a lot more work to be done, but on the mixed use definitions, the way we've got the mixed use with residential emphasis and commercial emphasis. And when I look at those definitions in the document, they're almost identical to include the density of the residential allowed in either one of them. So how do we kind of differentiate between the two other than just that word?
Sure. Yeah. So when you look at the land use designation and the definition of mixed use, commercial and mixed use emphasis, there's in chapter 4, you'll see the various different types of mixed use. We have city center mixed use,
Right.
and currently it's really city center mixed use and mixed use. With the update, we're going to be then introducing a mixed use commercial emphasis and a mixed use residential emphasis, along with the downtown mixed use. Really the distinction between downtown mixed use, residential and commercial emphasis is really the non-residential floor area ratio that's associated with the commercial emphasis. By having a non-residential floor area ratio, that is a signal that with any new development that's happening on that mixed use commercial site, that there's going to be a minimum area associated with commercial uses to support the residential that may be developed on site. So it's a putting in a minimum commercial development standard that would encourage not just residential development, but at least a minimum commercial development as part of that
So
site.
there will be further refined development standards associated with those definitions?
There will be. So in the general plan, it has the definition of mixed use commercial and residential emphasis. And then the zoning ordinance is what implements
Okay,
those designations. And then that's where you'll see those objective standards associated with height, setbacks, parking requirements, all of those things associated with mixed use. And those will be separate document in the zoning ordinance from the general plan.
okay. All right, thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Okay,
Councilman Rubio had.
Councilman Rubio.
All right, thank you. Just had another question, sort of. So as was sort of touched on a little bit, a lot of these have some, like for example, a growth management element, land use, which you mentioned, environmental justice being an element of that, traffic circulation, open space conservation, air quality and greenhouse gas element. There's all of that has a social environmental element component to it. Who is handling, I mean, other than the planning commission, I know that you guys are working overtime. Is there have you guys considered at all possibly having a climate or environmental justice of some sort advising committee that would help you really hone in not only on the planning, but how we're going to pay for it? Because I think there's a lot of opportunities right now out there to pay for a lot of these initiatives that we may want to take. And I would hate for us to miss those opportunities because we're not making good use. We have a lot of active organizations in our own community here in San Ramon then I'm sure would love to help be a supportive, play a supportive role in this effort. Have you guys even considered that at all?
So I don't think that that has come up in conversation, at least in the build up to tonight's meeting. Something just to consider as far as San Ramon and the requirements for the environmental justice element or policies when it's related to state law is that San Ramon's not considered a disadvantaged community in the sense that we are required to have an environmental justice element, but we continue to carry out those policies within our land use element so that environmental justice is at the forefront of any planning that we're doing. And so you'll see a number of new policies that have been identified in Chapter 4 that specifically related to social justice or environmental justice. It was also a big component of our housing element update and evaluation of affirmatively furthering fair housing. All of the housing opportunity sites and the identification of where housing should be going really evaluated not overburdening certain neighborhoods or putting housing in less resourced areas. A lot of that was built into our housing element document, which then really drove a lot of our general plan policies in the other chapters. And so a lot of conversations have gone into making sure that we're appropriately locating housing and how that then impacts traffic or circulation or open space or park associated within those neighborhoods. And so a lot of that has been incorporated into the draft itself, but we haven't yet had a conversation about the need for a group or a subcommittee or something to specifically focused on environmental justice.
Right. And I mean, and if it's something of concern, like you could always have an ad hoc committee where it's temporary for this specific purpose to help us, for example, with the climate action plan, et cetera, right, as well. I just think that when you have a committee that could really help sort of be the cohesive glue that bring us back together on all these metrics, I think it really would be an asset for the commission, the planning commission, and for us as city council members to really see how this all ties in together. But it also has an element of fiscal responsibility and then going back and seeing where we can identify opportunities to offset costs wherever possible.
And now we'll turn the meeting over to Chair Alpert to get comments or questions from the commissioners.
Great. Well, thank you. And first of all, let me welcome our newest commissioner, Dave, to the dais. Thank you. And for joining us. And Asher, this is your third meeting. So you have some new ones with us, but thank you so much. I will turn to the fellow commissioners, but there's one question that Councilmember Armstrong asked that I want to just make sure I understood because it could also guide the follow-on questions. Is it planned to send this document and review and discussion back to just a planning commission meeting in the future, or will everything be done in joint meetings like tonight?
Well, there will be a need in the future as part of Measure G that we have our separate meetings with the Planning Commission to make sure that we get our recommendations from the Planning Commission that we pass on to the City Council. Those meetings are expected, I would say maybe in the August, September timeframe. Right now, that's the projected time in which we would not only have our joint meeting, but then also kind of then move into our planning commission specific review of the document and the environmental document as well. That's part of that review before we make that recommendation to City Council.
Okay, and just for context, back on May 16th, we had just a policy review of the land use and growth management element and the maps that we have tonight. And we spent over 3 hours just going through that. And that's typically what we would do is we would go policy by policy and just, I think we made Cindy, we would well, Cindy practically lost her voice that night, but she did a fabulous job.
I have it back now.
You're back. Thank you. But I just want to make sure that, your hope is that we do that same thorough review like we always do, but that would be at a planning commission only meeting, workshop, study session, and not held in with a
Public
joint
hearing.
meeting.
Yeah, public hearings.
Please, please, Bertie, please.
I see,
Come
okay.
tomorrow if you want to see a 4-hour meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So with that, I will turn it over to the commissioners to ask any, I think at this point, clarifying questions and try and avoid into making comments. Well, out of fairness, I think we'll allow Dave and Asher to pick when they want to speak, because this is just not fair to make them speak first. So Commissioner,
Thank you, Cindy. We appreciate your help and we appreciate your effort. Thank you so much. Just want to understand, we talk about public participation, and public to me are the residents of San Ramon and the businesses. When I read this document, I find it a bit overwhelming. Even being a lawyer, I think it was very hard for me to go through this document. How are we, what steps are we taking to get the input from the residents? And how are we explaining these documents to them, or the changes for them to give us a effective input?
So leading up to tonight's meeting, we've had a couple of community workshops that started in the summer of 2021, just really explaining the very basics. What is the general plan? What's required under state law? What each element is responsible for? How does the climate action plan, the environmental review, all of that is associated with the review that has to be done as part of the update. We did then a series of what I would call road shows, going to the Art and Wind Festival, the Education Foundation fairs, real estate groups, anybody that would listen to, the staff talk about what this update involves, what feedback that we're looking for, so that we can narrow those conversations down to maybe topics that they might be interested in. We brought those to individual committees and commissions. So those 13 committees and commissions, we went from Teen Center all the way to Parks Commission and everything in between. Every committee that exists in the city, we essentially brought elements to those committees to really get some feedback. And so a lot of time has been spent kind of on an education side, explaining what a general plan is and what the opportunity here is for the city to determine how it wants to look like in 2040. And so that's kind of been the lead up to this evening. With the release of this document, we do expect to then go back through to the different committees that have been involved. Again, now that we have the actual drafts, going back to Parks Commission, Open Space Committee, Traffic Advisory Committee, and those committees, now that those changes have been incorporated. And so bringing those back, so that's it'll be in a smaller group setting where we are talking specifically about elements of interest to those groups. And then through our Plan San Ramon website engagement that way. But the public hearing process is really an opportunity to make sure that if there are questions about the direction the city is headed and what we've put into the document, for them to now provide us that feedback of, is everything that we heard leading up to this 2-year process been captured into this document? And so I would say that the meetings that preceded this one really went to education and explaining what this what the opportunity here was for the update, and taking suggestions and we had cards that we handed out to the community and surveys that we put out to the community on what they'd like to see incorporated into this. And so really this public hearing and then through this summer and into the fall is really the opportunity where we continue just the education part and making sure that there's an understanding within the community and an opportunity to give feedback.
Could I ask a couple more questions? So one thing I was interested in, and it caught my eye when I was reading the package I got on Thursday, on page 22, it talked about the I think what guiding principle, I think is the economic sector portion, journal. It talk about city needing to feel the pulse of businesses. How do you guys feel the pulse of businesses? Just curious, like what are the initiatives in place that allows you to sort of meet with businesses, talk to them about the needs and issues?
We have an economic development advisory committee that's made up of various different members within the community from both the business side and the resident side. That's one of the primary ways that we do engage with the business community. But we also do a number of different studies that are part of the pulse of the community. We have an economic development strategic plan that then looks at what types of businesses are missing within the city, or what type of uses the community would like to see within the city. And so there are a number of work items that are within the city manager's office as well as the planning department that then incorporates that. Like, how do we gauge the pulse? So between Economic Development Advisory Committee and then staff, a number of different measures that we take to kind of gauge the pulse over the course of the planning cycle.
Okay, can I ask one question? The definition of mixed use, and I've been perplexed by the definition of mixed use. Are they clear if is it true that you can have a mixed use with residential overlay with only just residents, no commercial shops and no retail?
So yes, there is that potential that, and specifically on housing opportunity sites that we've identified as sites that will accommodate our regional housing needs allocation. Because we do not have enough sites at the time that we adopted our housing element to accommodate for our 5,000 units that we were assigned by the state, we then have to designate opportunity sites to be able to meet those the regional housing needs allocation. But we also have to do rezoning of sites to be able to accommodate for that unit count. And so there is an opportunity, because we don't have enough sites currently that exist in San Ramon to accommodate that RHNA, that some of those sites by state law have to be allowed to be built if a developer were to propose 100% residential on those housing opportunity sites to be able to develop it without as 100% residential.
Thank you.
Somebody else want to go next? Sure. You have questions?
I have a wide variety of comments, questions. First of all, on page 11, when we were looking at the maps, I believe, of your packet today, pardon me. So in the section of marketplace, do you anticipate showing in that map the actual residential portion that we've already approved? Or will that just sort of hang out there like mixed use?
So it will stay mixed use land use designation on the general plan map and the zoning map. It is currently mixed use. It will just now have a mixed use with a commercial emphasis label that's replacing just that general mixed use. But because it's going to be developed with a residential component to it, we don't just change it from mixed use to then now residential.
Okay.
It will stay mixed use for the development standards that are going to be in place. That's how any future development will also be required to follow. So if it's not residential, so those standards will continue to stay mixed use.
Okay, thank you. I see the difference and I understand the clarification now. So another question that I have is in turning to where the land uses and dealing with the we're all here because we have a limited amount of land and apparently an unlimited number of things we'd like to do on that land. So the question about, as you look at land uses, the tension between our policies regarding parks, our desire to preserve retail, and then our obligation to produce housing. As I was trying to crunch the numbers about the land uses and the percentages, I had a really tough time making those work correctly according to the park standards of 6.5 acres per thousand, our growing population. So one of the questions that I have is in that land use is we have quite a number of acres for golf courses, but then they don't really pop up anywhere in our parks recreational designations. They don't factor into number of parks per population and so forth. So that was a question of concern, and I just offer that going forward. At some point, I don't really necessarily expect you to address it this evening. But again, just trying to make those numbers crunch. There are a few places in here where I think the verbiage gets a little flowery. And with no disrespect to our very cooperative neighbor, Sunset Development, the whole description about City Walk as vibrant and glowing. There's no other development that gets that kind of treatment in this kind of city document. So perhaps we could just be a little more even keel in our emotional response to City Walk. The other part is in discussing the future of retail and economic development. I noticed that we're still talking about leakage in a retail, but there isn't any acknowledgement that one of the very large retail centers is quickly collapsing and turning into residential use, and that is Stone Ridge. And so I would encourage whoever wrote that section or is analyzing that to perhaps go back and take a hard look at our emphasis that retail isn't what it should be, and the e-commerce. Maybe we're not as far out of contention of keeping dollars in the city if Stone Ridge is going to close, because we have certainly seen, I have anyways, people want to be out of their houses. They want to go somewhere, they want to be somewhere, and apparently they have just buckets of money to spend if you saw the line of traffic going to the outlets this weekend. So I would encourage a revision, a review of that. And then finally, in this section anyways, I would like to see us in section 9, which is part of the climate action, language that acknowledges information about our tree situation. I'm on page 212 of the packet for inquiring minds. And this is 9.6-I-5, where it says utilize drought tolerant green infrastructure. Completely support that. But I would like to also encourage us to add language that says to limit the removal of existing drought tolerant native species. There is this, I have to plead for the trees. Okay. And especially if they are mature, well-established native oaks, they're already drought tolerant. We should be, that's part of our climate action plan. We should be committed to saving those, and not just the 100-year-old ones, ones that maybe are only 30 or 40 years old, but they're making it. So that's my plead on that. And that comes up again in the greenhouse gases. So that's kind of summarizes my sticky notes for the time being. So those are my comments.
That captures all of your questions at this point.
Questions,
And
comments,
Okay,
it's all,
Okay.
it's a big question
they are quite, okay.
posed
They're
as
questions
comments.
posed as comments. I get you. Okay.
My
Okay.
turn. Get to talk.
Yes, you'll have multiple times to talk. Okay. Somebody else have questions? Yes,
So I just I'm new to this, obviously, so I do have a question. So what are the metrics that we use to understand that we are successful as a city in upholding quality of life and that this general plan is actually something that has been implemented and is successful in working? And are those metrics somewhere where the public can see the work that's being done to say, yes, we understand that this is the amount of retail that we're putting in and this is how it balances out? You know, the whole housing element, I think with the 5,111 houses have to be put into place. I don't know if there's a lot of good information out there that I've been able to see or find. Maybe that's just also my inexperience at that. But what metrics do we use so that when we have a general plan in place and say, and I know there's specific plans as well, that we can sit there and tell the general public of San Ramon, say, as a city council, as a planning commission, this is how we are measuring the success of this plan, and that they are able to see that success happening in some type of visual format that's taking place.
Yeah, so the two documents come to mind in terms of your question, as far as how does the city keep track of our implementation and ability to achieve the goals of the general plan. The first document is the city's annual housing progress report that is submitted to the state California Department of Housing and Community Development. It's one of the required reports that the city has to prepare to identify how many units we've reviewed that year, how many units have been constructed, or the process in which it took to get those units approved or reviewed. So on an annual basis, we do a report of how close we are to achieving our regional housing needs allocation, so that you can see at various points in time, are we getting closer to the meeting that goal of the 5,100 units that have been assigned to us. So that's one of the documents. Another document is related to the annual report that we do on the general plan update, or I'm sorry, the general plan annual report, the GPAR. And that's presented to the Planning Commission and the City Council typically in April or March of each year. And it includes feedback from every department that's working on the various policies. And it gives an update each year as to how these policies have been implemented, or how close we are to being able to achieve these things. And if there's a need to further refine our approach to implementation, that's typically on an annual basis, the analysis that we do to see, are we meeting our policies that we've identified that we'd like to achieve for the general plan. And then the third one that comes to mind is our climate action plan. We do a biennial report of the climate action plan just to see how many electric vehicles maybe the city has purchased, or how, what have been the code updates that have been done to be able to continue to achieve our greenhouse gas or air quality emissions. And so there are a couple of different documents that exist, and I'm sure other departments that I'm a little less familiar with are also doing the same implementation. Parks Commission, I know, does a lot of work with looking at planned and proposed parks, and then as part of that implementation, how are they getting there to meeting our goal at the end of our planning period. But each on an annual basis, all of the departments get together to look at how close are we to achieving these goals that we've set, and identifying where can additional resources or efforts be put into getting closer to achieving those policies.
And those are all displayed for the public or have access to those?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that.
Good question. Thank you. That leaves you. Questions?
I have lots of comments, but I'm going to try and restrict my time to questions. Nice to see you again. I
Yes.
guess you missed me in the last 2 weeks. Okay.
Questions then within Question mark.
Okay. First question. Bob owns a property in the area that you've designated as downtown mixed use north. Bob does not own a piece of property that's a housing opportunity site. Bob wants to tear down an office building and build an apartment building. No non-residential use. Under your general plan proposal, Bob can do that, can he?
In the downtown mixed use.
North.
Oh, let me just.
It's the area in between Crow Canyon and City Center mixed use.
So I may have to get back to you on that specific question, but we'll have to look at the tables, but maybe we can let me sit and think about that particular one because I don't have the in front of me.
Well, all the mixed use areas, now we basically eliminated the generic mixed use and we've gone to 4 specific ones. Isn't the mixed use commercial emphasis the only one that actually requires any non-residential use in a project?
Well, if it's a non-housing opportunity site, there still would be a requirement of a mix of of non-residential and residential. So it doesn't eliminate the outright that a non-residential component is part of that project. It's just that with housing opportunity sites, there is that opportunity for 100% residential.
No, I understand that. Let's go back to the first part. It's not a housing opportunity site.
Right.
In order to qualify as mixed use, how much non-residential use has to be part of the project? Under the general plan.
Well, in the general plan, it doesn't set the development standards for the percentages or square footages associated with land use. It does set density ranges and floor area ratios, but
The only floor area ratio is for mixed use commercial emphasis. The other mixed use areas have requirements for residential. They have ranges for residential, but there's nothing in the general plan outside of the mixed use commercial emphasis area that requires any non-residential use. And the general plan itself, even in the mixed use commercial emphasis, doesn't define what is a objective standard for what is the minimum amount of non-residential use that's required to bless a project as misuse, does it?
yes, so I found the sheet I was looking for. We previewed development standards with the Planning Commission a couple of study sessions ago. In those development standards, we're looking at the downtown mixed use north. It does not include a minimum non-residential floor
Right.
area ratio. It still will require a component of non-residential residential. It just doesn't set a
How much?
minimum,
How much?
but it does not set a minimum non-residential floor area or a percentage.
Then what's the objective standard for determining whether it has enough non-residential use?
Well, we haven't set those objective standards. If there is some specific guidance that the Planning Commission would like to give us, we can certainly incorporate that in.
So are you planning on putting it in the general plan?
Not as it's currently written, it doesn't have a non-residential FAR, but if that's something that the Planning Commission, City Council are interested in incorporating in, we could look at adding that into the definitions of downtown mixed use north.
Well, that was discussed in the ad hoc meetings, wasn't it?
Well, as far as having a non-residential, we had looked at the best way to identify whether percentages or floor area ratios were an opportunity to do that. It has not carried forward in the downtown mixed use standards. It is something that we did incorporate into the commercial emphasis, but if that's an oversight or something that the commission would like for us to add, we can certainly incorporate that into the downtown mixed use.
Okay.
Now,
Currently, what was described in some of our meetings as downtown mixed use south, AKA Chevron Park, AKA the Orchards, You still have it on the general plan map. You're going to create it as mixed use. That's the proposed alternative.
That's the proposed alternative.
Okay.
The current land use map in chapter 4 shows it still as OA, administrative office.
And at the present time, is there any percentage that is being considered for what would be considered a acceptable non-residential use in Chevron Park?
We haven't gotten that far. We've just only looked at it as an alternative because there's an active application that's been filed for a land use change to that site.
Does staff have an opinion with respect to Chevron Park, whether the density ought to be done on the entire property as is the case in City Walk, or should it be done on a project by project basis?
So I'm going to turn that over to Debbie. I haven't been as involved.
Yeah,
with-
I think the vision is that'll be done as it was on City Walk over the entire project.
Okay.
Or property, I should say. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
One of the things that we're at least looking at is to repeal our sainted North Camino Ramon specific plan. If we repeal that, does the PDA, the priority development area, still remain in effect?
The PDA designation would still remain in effect.
Okay.
We would
Okay.
essentially update the language of that to, instead of refer to the specific plan area, would just be the North Camino Ramon plan area,
Okay.
or not plan area, but area.
In the land use element, it has a definition that I think we struggled over last year a bit on defining net acres. And it refers to, you take the gross acreage and exclude all public and private streets. And then quote, streets which provide primary and direct access to a public street, close quote. Now, is this a third type of street? Or is it something that's public or private?
No, I think as part of our conversations with the planning commission at a previous study session, we had looked at striking out that third type of street.
Well, is that something other than public or private?
No, it would just be public or private.
Okay. So isn't that kind of redundant?
Yeah, if you'd like to give me maybe a page number, I can make sure that we look at that edit.
I believe it's on 62. Packet page 62. It also on page 62 also refers to workforce housing. I don't believe that we have a workforce housing definition. Is it possible to put one in our general plan?
Yes.
Cindy, that last one on the streets was part of the paragraph that's density intensity standards, which is, it's real page 14 of the land use element. It's a little confusing because we have the track changes version of the original, but it's that first paragraph of the land use
Okay.
density/intensity standards section. That's the bold heading.
Okay, that's not a problem. In the open space element on packet, I think it's page 81, but it's policy number 8.7-I-2. It refers to a historic resources evaluation for buildings that are 45 years old. That would apply to buildings built 1978 and earlier. Now, why was 45 years picked, and would this apply to a home that was built in 1970?
So the 45 year is actually from the California Environmental Quality Act. That's the standard in which further environmental evaluation is needed if there's going to be a change to demolition to a structure that is older than 45 years. It potentially requires some additional level of environmental review to evaluate the historical
So
component.
let's hypothetically, let's assume Bob owns a house that was built in 1970. And Bob wants to tear it down and build a fourplex. Would he have to go through an historic resources evaluation before he did that?
As far as the, like, obtaining a demolition permit to do a destruction of that building, if there is some historical significance associated with that building, that is something, if it is older than 45 years, as obligated under CEQA, even though it's a demolition permit, it's not, it could still be subject to a historical analysis if it is beyond 45 years. It
Okay.
can be things associated with, was there a famous person maybe that inhabited that house, or did something historical happen in that structure during that 45-year period that may impact the ability to demo that house?
Okay, last question. In the facilities section, it refers to Martin Clean. I think that's Marin Clean Energy. Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have.
This is a point of procedure, Chair. We did open it up for comments also to the council. If you want, turn them loose again.
I think we want to finish questions and then we'll maybe do public comment and then we can get a shot at comments again. So I did have, since it came up a couple times, Cindy, what's your recommendation or preference for awkward writing, typos, whatever, just technical things that we might find like we tend to? Typically you like us to just send them to you and staff will evaluate them, but
Yeah, similar to how all public comment that we receive, if the commission or council has some edits that they'd like for us to incorporate, we would do that essentially an errata table that would document all those changes.
good, thank you. And I think I heard the question, there is a plan to send these, sections back to the appropriate bodies, whether it's EDAC or OSAC, Open Space Advisory or Parks. So, we don't have to assume that we know everything they know tonight. Is that fair? Yeah.
Certainly, but ultimately they're making recommendations to the Planning Commission, City Council for the general plan update. And so, potentially at the next time that we meet, we can give you an update or summary of what feedback that they had on those elements, and we can summarize that at the next time we meet.
Good. Okay. And then we received and I'm confused by this, we did receive a public comment regarding, the Gelderman property on the west side. And you made a comment that it's actually outside, it's part of the county. Could you kind of just give us a little overview of what all this means related to property outside of the city limits, but part of our planning area and all of how that works?
Sure. So let me just make sure I refer to that map, because it has, I believe, boundary lines here. So what's referred to as Gelderman property is actually an old reference to Gelderman property. There is some various ownership in that those three parcels that are identified here, but there are multiple owners, but we commonly refer to it as the Gelderman property as the first family that essentially owned those parcels, and so we've just commonly referred to as Gelderman. Those parcels are outside of city limits. It's difficult to see on this map, so I'll point it out here, but there's a red dotted line that it's a little easier to see here. This red dotted line that kind of runs just south here, that's actually identifies the city limit, where the city's incorporated property is on the right-hand side of this dotted red line, and everything on the west side of this dotted red line is outside of city limits. And so the properties is outside of city limits, but it's still within the city's planning area. We've the land use map identifies land uses beyond just city limits. It looks at the entire planning area and what potential future land uses may be that are outside of city limits.
If I can elaborate on that. Outside the city limits, where is it? Is it inside the urban limit line for either the county or the city?
So there is an urban growth boundary that the city has adopted. It's similar to the county's urban limit line. So it's that this shape that's drawn around Hillside Residential is the extent of the urban growth boundary line. So I'll just follow that again. This, more or less this line that follows that parcel is considered where the urban growth boundary line is on the land use map. And that urban growth boundary continues, circles around Quarry is this Quarry?
Place.
Quarry Place.
Yeah.
And then continues on the backside of these homes here, but it is within the urban growth boundary, but outside of city limits.
So we do, our actions here are within the city's responsibility as opposed to the county's. Is that, or?
So I'll just say if there was a development that was proposed within that area, ultimately, because it's not within city limits, it's not our jurisdiction if there is a proposal there, unless there was a request for annexation to the city. And so at this time, because the jurisdiction obligations are still Contra Costa counties for any decisions on development or improvements on those sites.
Okay. And then,
Let me take another
Yeah,
step if I can.
please.
If it's inside the urban limit line of the county, though, it'd be something the planning commission should know about, that they could put housing on there.
They could put housing, if it's in Contra Costa County, you
Yes.
mean, if it's still not incorporated within
Yes.
city limits, right? So the county would still, as part of their review process, engage the city to let us know as part of their review that there is something adjacent to the city limits that could potentially impact either residents or the community.
Great, thank you.
And we have the opportunity to comment when we see that
That's
proposal,
correct, right?
if it were to come.
Yeah. So I have one last question, and this has to do with, it's chapter 4 in the planning sub areas in San Ramon. We talk, and it's really, the question is, we talk a lot about the city core as being kind of a major part of our city, but there's not a definition in the general plan about city core as a planning area. Is it possible that we could create one, or is there some other process to add a planning area, to the document?
Yeah, perhaps within those sub areas, we can talk about city core and perhaps include a map that maybe identifies what that city
Okay,
core is.
that'd be helpful. Okay, that is it for my questions. Unless, please.
The policies, when they're drafted, how much are they set in stone? For example, the one I'm referring to is in package page 23. That talks about promotion of businesses in San Ramon and talk about having low business license fees. So, for example, let's say this, the city decides, we need to up the license fee because it's going to help with the budget process. Even though we say here is a low business license fee, what is the impact by putting that verbiage in here and some changes to the budget that will require us to have a higher license fee? Does it matter, or?
Well, so I think it does matter.
Okay.
At least the language that we pick for that policy and how we want to go moving forward. If you wanted to include, caveats to the what is considered low, or maybe a definition of what low is, or maybe replace low with something that could better articulate what it is that the city is trying to achieve. So there's an opportunity to change that, but ultimately, when we are as a city evaluating fee schedules and looking at how much each of those fees are, we still do consider the general plan policies that are in place when we are looking at those increasing those fees. And so I know that's done as part of the whole evaluation of fees when we are when the city is considering increasing those.
Mayor, I think the planning commission's done with our questions.
Okay, well, I think it's a moment of truth. We're here to open a public hearing.
I'll move, we open the public hearing.
I'll second that.
The motion Perkins, second Rubio. Any further discussion? No. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? I'll let you count them up, John. Okay, then we'll open public comment. Do you have a speaker card first?
Yes, we have 2 speaker cards. Our first speaker card is from Taiwan Country.
Hello, council members and commissioners. It was really interesting hearing all of you asking questions. I came in and I sat through the presentation. I'm a little bit disappointed because I got the packet. It was 301 pages long, and a lot of them had red text, blue text, black text, and a bunch of cross lines. So it's really about revision of languages. Unfortunately, Ms. E, when I came in anyways, really didn't touch on those revision of languages, which makes me nervous. It feels like we're all being blindfolded because her presentation really touches on something that is irrelevant to today's meeting topic. I really suggest that it's not about hearing. When people come here and they don't have the 301 pages that nobody provides for the public back there today, we are all blindfolded and we're mute. We're really not dealing with what is at hand. I strongly recommend that you take this to a workshop, like what budgets were done, like how budgets were done. I think it was very effective. And then we can really dive into the languages. For example, I just have like 8 things I can even, present right now, which involves the revision, but nobody touches on. For example, on page 5, Ms. E's report has said that by 2040, the general plan demographics would have drastic increases in population and housing units. But how do those fit into her revision? And then how does that get executed in terms of development and awards to the developers? Nothing was touched on that, but that's really what we are here to discuss today. And then additional school sites and all the page 7, community services and infrastructures, fire protection services, flood control, parks, police, sanitation, schools, water. There is no reference on the revision of languages pertaining to these services. So then what are we approving? Furthermore, traffic circulation, extremely important. There's a bunch of crossed out red texts here. How does that impact, again, to executions? And why all those crossed out lines and everything? And then page 11, okay, anyways, and then who made the draft of the plans? Is it according to, mislicensed guidelines or, state standards? And page 16 says we're no longer affluent. Why aren't we affluent? And how does that change our development in terms of the revision? Thank you.
Thank you. Next card, please.
Gary Chapin.
Gary?
Mayor Hudson, council members, commissioners. 44-year resident of San Ramon. I've been loving what's going on in the city in so many ways, but I'm getting a little bit worried with regards to what's going on with the city. And I want to thank you for your insightful questions, Councilmember Rubio, Commissioner Hamed, you too, about economic development stuff. And I love Matrix, things you can work with. So we talk about taking things away and we never talk about putting things back. So we're talking about like club sport tennis courts. Okay, people use those. Where are they going to go if they don't have those? So I know that's getting into the weeds a little bit, but we as citizens need to know those kinds of things if we're going to be talking about what to do in our city. What's been delivered tonight, very hard for a normal citizen to kind of understand what's going on. I know that you guys have spent a lot of time working on this, and I really appreciate it. And we put our hopes and desires and needs and right to you, because that's, you're the ones that are doing it. But there's so many things that are very vague within this presentation. I read through a lot of the 300 and whatever pages just to try and figure out what's going on. I got confused too about the red lines, blue lines, green lines, and what have you. If we take a look at what was happening this weekend with the wind fair, people want to be outside. And I heard that mentioned earlier. We can't be taking things away without putting things back. I mean, if you're going to be removing places where people go to be outside, where are you going to put them back? Where are you planning on this happening? All I heard about was housing, lots of housing. Every one of those people that are living in that house want to have some way to get out and do something in San Ramon. And we've had that. The parks are very beautiful. The school system working with the city and all that, it's been wonderful. But we got to continue. If we're going to add this many new residents, where are they going to go? Where are they going to be doing? The wind fair was marvelous. The Parks and Recs did a great job. So, but I feel squeezed. As a longtime resident, I'm feeling a little bit squeezed with everything that's going on. I think we need office buildings that are more technologically set up for people to do business on maybe a daily basis, a weekly basis, or 3 days a week or 2 days a week, where the technology is at the very best there is available, so that they can get in there and use very high speed internet, very high quality things where they can rent the office for a few days. I think that what we're seeing, talking about them being in their homes and working, they do want to get out too. I mean, I have neighbors who are excited to get outside, even though they're working from home, and they would like to go someplace else and be able to work. So I think that's the thing we need to be talking about. So finally, I'm a new member of the EDAC committee. I want to make sure that if you have any questions for economic development, I'd love to know what they are. I want to get out and meet the businesses in San Ramon. I want to find out what's on their hearts and minds. And see how we can help that grow, whether it has to be with licensing or whether it has to be with availability of property, funding. What do we need to do to get retail and commercial back into San Ramon? And I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Let me make one thing clear. I heard it earlier and I didn't say anything. We're not making a decision tonight.
Yeah.
We're not even closing the public hearing. The whole reason you open this up is to hear what you just said. And you're speaking for a lot of people. But anyway, any more cards?
No, but we do have hands raised on Zoom.
Oh, good. Let's bring them in.
The first one would be Jim Blickenstaff.
Hey, Jim.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and Commissioners. I want to just, I sent something into you in writing, which covers a lot of points I won't really cover tonight, but I hope you get a chance to look at some of them. What I find is a general sense of overdominance of the planning process and the general plan by an emphatic need for housing beyond actually the capacity of the city to accommodate it in a smart planning way. And when you overfocus on housing opportunity sites, I heard this phrase like 30 times tonight, you're under focusing on the other necessary things that have to make the city work properly for the citizens. That includes retail, commercial, parks. Where's the emphasis on that? I think if it's not going to come from the state, it has to come from inside the city. We have to prioritize the balance of planning to include parks and retail and commercial, and other aspects of a whole community. This focus on housing opportunity sites is distorting our perspective. And if we don't reestablish that perspective for the benefit of the city, who will? Certainly not the state. That's a given. So they are in opposition to smart planning for San Ramon and what's in the best interest of San Ramon. We have to understand that. And that gets back to the general plan. The more you put in soft words that don't really emphasize and authorize enforcement of standards, the more those standards don't really mean much. So I'd like to see a focus on strong wording of anything relating to standards in terms of livability of the city or the aesthetics of the city whenever possible. I see too many instances in some of the review I did where they use the word encourage instead of require, or instead of provide or ensure. And that's a weak word that can be played with and disposed of if needed for other purposes. And then there are standards that's been replaced by guidelines. Why replace standards with guidelines? Because guidelines is a weaker word. And again, it weakens the enforcement of what should be the maintenance of standards. So in terms of wording, needs a lot of work here. And I think we can reemphasize on the wording with the purpose of being proactive for the maintenance of the standards of livability in this community and the maintenance of the green space in this community. Because somebody mentioned earlier, are we becoming a bedroom community? What do you think is going to happen when all you do is focus on housing opportunity sites and you don't do a balance? Of course, we're going to be a bedroom community because of all the thousands of houses. And what happens then? More traffic, because they have to go somewhere outside the city for their jobs. So, and one other thing is parks. The less you devote to parks, the more people are going to drive their cars to other locations. So that increases traffic too. So I'd like to see a balance refocused in the general plan. Thank you.
That was brought up tonight too, Jim. I saw a lot of note taking here by our planning commission, so you must have hit a note somewhere. Up next, star 9.
Yes, it would be Ed Schaefer.
Ed, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to first start by saying, as a land use attorney, I have seen hundreds of commission and council meetings and staff presentations, and Ms. Yee did one of the best ones I've ever seen. So I commend her and the city planning department. I represent the El Nido Trust, which is owner of the Gelderman property that's been mentioned. Staff is suggesting that it be changed from hillside residential to open space in the general plan. If you haven't already, I ask that you please read a letter I submitted today objecting to this change. The key points are that the property is inside the urban growth boundary that was adopted by San Ramon's voters in 1999 with the intent to recognize that it would be developed with housing. And that has not changed despite reviews over the years of the urban growth boundary. The general plan should remain consistent with the urban growth boundary. The housing element recently adopted and state law promotes housing development, not reducing the land available designated for housing. Ms. Yee stated that the goal is to put housing in the core of the city, and that was the reason for changing this designation. But I can't believe that all of the 10,000 new units that are planned or anticipated would be in the core. And I also don't believe the city intends that all 10,000 new units will be high density units, that the city does still want some single family development in the area. Staff explains this change by saying that the general plan should be changed to match the West Side specific plan. This is not appropriate under land use law. The specific plan was adopted in 1989, 34 years ago, before the urban growth boundary was adopted. It is outdated regarding this property. State law specifically says specific plans are supposed to be consistent with general plans, not the other way around. The California Supreme Court, in a landmark decision, explained that the tail does not wag the dog. The general plan governs, not a lower regulation such as the specific plan or zoning. And your own general plan policy 4.7-1-3, which is cited in the staff report, states that the West Side specific plan should be amended to be consistent with the general plan, not the other way around. Now, in some circumstances, it may be appropriate to refine a general plan to add land use details that are spelled out in a more detailed specific plan, but that does not make it appropriate to make a fundamental change in a permitted land use. The property owners have been working for years on plans to build housing on this property. In fact, staff once told developers that they will need to amend the specific plan to match the general plan. And I know it was mentioned that it could be developed under county auspices, and that may happen, but the eventual developer may want or need to annex to the city for city services or better planning coordination. The general plan recognizes the urban growth boundary. It allows.
Okay, thank you, Ed. We have your written comment on this. Okay, next speaker.
Before I proceed with more of the hands raised on those on Zoom, we did receive a total of 5 written public comments. All of those public comments were sent to the city council and the commissioners. They are also before them and in the back of the room in the red binder. So our next speaker is Joyce Carr.
Joyce, you have the floor.
Good evening. And it's just it's nice to be able to speak with you guys tonight. What comes to mind, and I've been thinking, this has of course been going on for a long time. I'm a resident of San Ramon since 1986. My husband and I and our family is sad because I tell you, there isn't a time that I don't drive through San Ramon, going and coming wherever I'm going and whatever I'm doing, that I don't look and appreciate the hills, appreciate the trees, appreciate the wonderful landscaping that is always done. If you've ever noticed on major streets like San Ramon Valley Boulevard, Bollinger and whatever, the landscaping, everything is always pristine and it looks wonderful. And I just love this town. I hate to see these high-story buildings come up that are going to block our beautiful views of the trees and the hills. The way I look at this is all because developers want to make money. And they're taking away so much from us. I'm concerned about schools and where the kids are going to go to school. I'm a retired teacher of 30 years. From what I've heard, there are not going to be a lot of low income houses. So they use this as an excuse for housing for people, but there's not going to be a lot of low income housing. And so that's not going to help a lot of people. All it's going to do is add a lot of traffic to our city. And we have enough traffic as it is. And on the freeways and 680, I know you've all been on them when you've been going, 2 miles an hour. I know when they put Doherty Valley out there, they mentioned that one reason for putting Doherty Valley out there was that people could work at Bishop Ranch. Well, I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm just wondering how many people commute just to Bishop Ranch that live in Doherty Valley. Probably not a lot of them. We need more retail. We need that Nob Hill grocery store in the marketplace, which they don't seem to want to keep. So I just think that these changes that are going to be made in our city are not good. And I think we have to fight the state of California and tell them we don't have we have traffic problems. We don't have the room. We want our pretty views. I know I'm at 0. Oh, I'm going over. But please take these things into account next time you're driving through our city. Please take a look and see what a beautiful city it is. I just love this city. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for joining us, Joyce. Okay, next,
Susie Ferris Inderkum.
Susie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Hudson, council members and commissioners. I must say that some of what's concerned me is watching the watered down changes around what was specified in the general plan before for Marketplace. And those changes now seem to all be in favor of the property owner. And they also do not protect retail. For example, I'm looking at 4.6-1-22, and it's been blue lined to where it now reads, continue to limit non-retail uses to no more than 25% of the total FAR of a neighborhood or community shopping center, and adopt clear economic findings that must be made before approving non-retail uses that exceed the limit. So you're saying you're going to continue to limit, then you talk about adopting clear economic findings that must be approved, but it doesn't say what those are, before approving non-retail uses that exceed the limit. So there really isn't a limit. And I've got a number of those. When we talked about how do we provide input on these, I mean, I could do an extensive rewrite on these things. I'm just kind of astounded that we've got this kind of language in there and that it really isn't going after protecting our retail. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Okay, you have-
Stephanie Hill.
Stephanie, you have the floor.
Good evening. On behalf of Sunset Development, I'm Stephanie Hill. We appreciate the opportunity Sunset has had over the past several months to discuss our future vision of Bishop Ranch and the city's housing element. We support the city core alternative, which establishes the downtown mixed use north and downtown mixed use south zones. The implementation of these zones allows Bishop Ranch to transform into a great place, offering the highly amenitized lifestyle people are seeking with proximity to jobs, restaurants, retail, high quality housing, parks, and open space within a 15-minute walk. In response to Commissioner Wallace's question, for orchards, we are proposing site-wide density rather than project by project. Thank you.
Thank you. Your next speaker, please.
There are no more public comments.
Okay, then I'll close the public comment.
Close public comment.
Okay, it's closed.
No. We have to have a motion and a vote.
Okay, wait a minute. You're talking about public comment or public hearing? It's public comment. Okay. You need a second to close the public hearing.
I'm sorry.
No, the public hearing will be continued.
Through the mayor, you don't need to continue the public hearing. We can, because we're going to renotice and have a second hearing sometime at a date uncertain. So we can go ahead and close the public hearing at this point.
Okay, we have a motion, Perkins.
I'll second.
Second,
I'll
Alfred. Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? No. Okay. You got to count on that one, Joan? Sounds like a
I
lot to
did.
me. Okay. You've heard what you've heard tonight. Any comments?
Yes.
Okay. Starting with Councilmember Perkins.
Okay. I'm gonna skip over and I'll get with Debbie and Cindy with the edits, small edits, but I do have some things. Page 37. We have dispatch services now come from the county. Don't come from the county. They now come from our own dispatch center. On page 45, 3.4-I-7. It specifically says, let me pull it up here real quick. 3.4-I-6.
says support future transit uses such as light rail or BART in the I-680 right of way. I cannot support that. I can support future transit uses in the I-680 right of way, but I'd like to delete light rail and BART from that implementing instruction. There are things such as Innovate 680 is got a whole package of innovations that will improve traffic on I-680, and none of those include light rail or BART. Let's see here. Parking on page 75 and page 105, parking. Whether it's in the zoning ordinance or it's part of the general plan, we need to have some standards that specifically address developments that are adjacent to streets that don't have on-street parking. Give as an example, the marketplace and what's called the Iron Horse. What's that new Iron Horse?
Iron Horse Village.
Iron Horse Village. That is packed into a spot that doesn't have any on-street parking. And so therefore the overflow is really problematic. And I point to Aspenwood at Kimball is a place that does have on-street parking. We authorized a reduced parking plan there. And I'm sure in the back of everybody's mind was the fact that there's some on-street parking there at Kimball that would be useful. Places where we've had problems are places like Mirabella and Fioli, where there's no driveways or there's very limited driveways. So we either need to have driveways or plenty of on-street parking and things like that. I don't know whether it goes in the zoning ordinance or it goes in the general plan, but we can't ignore that. I'm glad you removed the library standards that were honestly, as you add one resident, you don't add 1 square foot, or you add a few residents, you don't add a square foot or two to your library, and you don't add another plug and all the things that go with it. It was kind of awkward to maintain that. When we get into the electrical and utilities place, I would like somebody to take some effort to take into account the fact that over 90% of the population of San Ramon are MCE customers. And MCE is 97% greenhouse gas free. And so if you look at the chart, it showed 10%, or it showed 11%, and it showed a whole bunch of carbon dioxide emissions. And it clearly didn't take into account the fact that most people in this city are MCE customers. And so there's a number of places where that applies, and you need to go back through the electrical section and all the residential and virtually, by the way, the 10% that aren't MCE customers are PG&E customers, and they're 63% greenhouse gas free. So that number of metric tons of CO2 that's emitted to provide electricity in the city is a fraction of what's shown in the charts. Okay. Helen brought up a good point. I had a comment here in my own notes. Could you tell your vendors, contractors to use the same track changes colors? Can we use one color for deletions and a separate color for additions? And everybody, all your contractors use the same combination of red and green or blue and black or whatever it is. But it was really annoying, to say the least, to go from chapter to chapter and try and figure out what's additions and what's, and some of them were even the same color. The additions and the subtractions were the same color. You just had to read through the lines. Dougherty Station Community Center And DVC San Ramon is shown to be changing from public and semi-public to mixed-use residential, and that is in one of your charts here. Let's see if I can find it, which page it is. But why would we change that one? Okay, it is. Where is that?
I get wrapped in Deer Creek.
No, it's not, it's not there. This is out in Dougherty Valley. It's Dougherty Station. Okay. We will find it.
Deer Creek
Should
South.
be the first image.
It is. Dougherty Valley Mixed Use Site, very first one.
Yes.
Slide 13. Why would we change public and semi-public away from public and semi-public? We're not going to tear down our community center, and we're not going to tear down the college. So why would we change it?
It's actually to match the Dougherty Valley specific plan. So when the
Why did we change the Dougherty Valley specific plan?
Dougherty Valley specific plan was written and adopted by Contra Costa County. And so it is now part of the city of San Ramon, but because the entire village center, or what we refer to as the village center, is both of those parcels, it's better reflected as mixed use for the entirety of that development project. And that's the existing zoning district is actually, I think, an error of identifying public, semi-public, when I think the mapper took liberties to just identifying it as public, semi-public, because that was what the inhabitants of the building are. But actually, because the specific plan identifies both of those parcels, or at least all of the parcels that are mixed use as mixed use in the village specific plan, it really should be mixed use. So we would actually consider it an error on the left-hand side that shows public, semi-public, because it shouldn't have been public,
Even though that's
semi-public
the way
to
it was
begin with.
built.
It's the land use that's inside, but it is technically mixed use from the sense of it's a mix of residential and non-residential uses, which includes institutional uses.
Okay. It sounds like a fight not worth having. On page 65, we have downtown mixed use north definition, but we don't have a downtown mixed use south definition. But you have a downtown mixed use south on your map, but we don't have a definition included in the text.
Yes.
So it shows up here, but it doesn't show up in the text.
So through the chair, if I could just address that particular question. Several meetings ago, as part of a joint session with the Planning Commission, City Council, prior to the application that's since been filed for the Orchards proposal, there was direction at that time to maintain the administrative office land use designation.
Right.
And so we effectively carried that direction forward and maintained it as administrative office. The map that you're referring to is labeled as the alternative to the land use. And so because the last direction received from this body was to
All right. Then if we as a group decide to proceed with the alternative, would you please include a new downtown mixed use south definition?
Yeah, so in addition to definitions, we'll also have to have additional edits to the general plan document that not only reflect the land use map change, but also policies related to downtown mixed use south.
So through the mayor, if I might, so another component to that is that we are looking at the downtown mixed use south as one of the alternatives for the environmental impact report. So at the time the direction was given, the commission's, go forward with the office, but we want to be able to
Yep.
have an flexibility, have an option if it
Mhm.
works out to preserve retail. So that will be presented to the commission and council at a future date.
To go on record, I am in favor of the alternate selections throughout this. The Iron Horse Trail itself is not shown as in our list of parks and the acreage associated with it. And because it's wholly within our city limits, as opposed to things like the Bishop Ranch open space, which is outside city limits, but adjacent to. I believe that we should include the Iron Horse Trail as part of the parks. The fact that we don't maintain it, I don't think is especially relevant. It could be listed as a special park. It has tremendous recreational value. And we know that the usage is very high. So I just recommend that the planning commission work on that. The mixed use ad hoc committee kind of foundered for a while, and I never heard back what the outcome was. And if they aren't finished with their work, I would suggest that we reconstitute the ad hoc mixed use committee and finish the work and report out. Because I don't know what mixed use is yet. Okay, I've got some technical changes, but I'll list those out for you. That's the sum total. Like I said, I'm a yes on the alternates, and I'm a no on supporting BART and light rail in the I-680. And I really want somebody to spend a little time updating the electrical. I know it's going to go into the CAP, but we're doing a lot, and we ought to get credit for it in our general plan. If we're going to include it at all, we need to get it right. And can we get our contractors to do color coding their changes so they're all the same?
Well, maybe I'm losing my touch, but I swear I can read Eric Wallace and he has comments.
Oh, gosh, yes.
I'm assuming I'm not the only one out there who does.
That's okay. Jump in while you're.
Mhm.
I will follow the mayor's instructions. My first comment is to staff. I thought you did a very good job on what is an awful assignment, trying to put a general plan together with all the restrictions that the state has imposed on us and that change almost every week. So my comments and questions aren't intended as criticism, but as a commissioner, I have to look at what you've written and try and figure out what the consequences are of what is written. And in part, what could some person do with those languages to create a benefit for themselves and a detriment for the city? I know we're going to get together and go over these elements at a later date, so I'm not going to go over all the comments that I wanted to make at this meeting. I wanted to do sort of a 10,000 foot view of things. On the economic development element, I have a hard time accepting some of the projections that were done for retail, for industrial space, and for office space. With respect to retail, I was on EDAC in 2005 when we drafted the original specific plan for economic development in the city. And at that time, we estimated that the city could support another 1 million square feet of retail. In almost 20 years, that has never matured. The most we've done is we have city center, but that's really the only new retail that's been done in the city. On the other side, we have lost retail in the city. We've lost about 40% of the marketplace because of a housing development. Basically, the rest of marketplace is a housing opportunity site that the owner could come in tomorrow and file an application to tear it down and build housing, and we would be forced to allow that. And if anybody has been to Marketplace recently, probably to go to Trader Joe's, which seems to be the only thing that's open, you've seen that a large portion of the property that's outside the area that the Marketplace homes will go in is vacant. There were, because of the restrictions that the state put on us to develop housing, in particular affordable housing, we have been forced to cannibalize a number of retail and commercial spaces in the city to develop housing. Across the street from Crow Canyon Commons is one, the Country Club Center is another. I find it very hard to believe that we have a realistic estimate of developing between 1 million and 1.8 million square feet of retail in the city, particularly when the 2022 study talks about 800,000 to 1.4 million, and that doesn't take into account what's being torn down to accommodate housing. On the idea of developing office space, what I know of Sunset from what they've told us is that they don't plan on building more space except right next to BR1, the office space for John Muir, and perhaps another office building. But in the core of the city, that's where all the housing opportunity sites are. And unless they're going to tear down just parking lots a la BR 2600, there are office buildings that are going to go the way of BR6. And so I find it very hard to believe that we are going to create another 500,000 to 750,000 square feet of offices, given what we've been told repeatedly by our consultants has been a sea change in the way people work, which is the hybrid business model. And at our last meeting on Chevron Park, we were told by Sunset that they have looked at the future and they don't see these buildings being fully occupied by anybody, that the employers who have portions in those buildings are only going to have employees in there part-time, therefore they need less space, therefore they need less buildings. So I think it's totally unrealistic to expect that the type of growth in office space that's in the economic element. Lastly, on the industrial, 250,000 to 500,000, I'm not sure where they're planning on putting it. I find it hard to believe they're going to put a labs in the middle of Bishop Ranch where they have 12 or 15 different housing opportunity sites. I just think that's unrealistic. And there may be some support in some of the consultants' reports, but as a decision maker, you have to take those reports with a grain of salt. Like any other expert, you have to look at what the expert says, apply some common sense, and figure out what is the most likely result. And I don't think what's projected in our economic element is realistic. I'm going to make an exception to talking at 10,000 square feet, 10,000 feet level. Packet, page 28. There is a section that deals with a 4-year college in the Tri-Valley. I confess, I'm the one who put it there. When we drafted the general plan back in 2000, I'm the one who put that in there. And I thought that that was a good idea at the time. And since that time, Las Positas has grown to the fact that it's one of the 10 best community colleges in the entire country. We have a UCD extension here. We had one at USF because my wife got her bachelor's degree from there. DVC now has that satellite campus that I've gone to with all the 18-year-olds. I just don't think that it is realistic possible that the state will ever put a 4-year college in the Tri-Valley when they have Cal State Hayward down the road and they have a satellite campus out in Concord. So please take that out. As much as it bothers me, it should be taken out. One thing on typos that we've talked about that I'm going to make an exception on saying, I brought this up at the May meeting of the Planning Commission. Our current general plan has a Jekyll and Hyde attitude towards how we describe San Ramon. In some places, they use capital C. In some places, they use a small c. I think it should be standardized, and I think that we should use a capital C. Now, I also thought that when we talk about the city, we should capitalize the T and the, but I think some other city has trademarked that, so I don't think we can do that. Workforce housing, we do need a definition. It's mentioned in the general plan. It has been for over 20 years, but no one's ever defined what workforce housing is. And I can tell you that 20 years ago, we used the term workforce housing because it was less pejorative than affordable housing. Because when you ever talked affordable housing to anybody, what flashed in people's mind was Section 8, Section 8. So we used workforce housing as a way to describe affordable housing, so people would accept it. Because when you think about it, as we explain to people, the people that live in those places are like firemen, they're teachers. They are people that can't afford the $2 million homes we build in San Ramon. They need something a little bit less expensive, and that's what we meant by that. I questioned Cindy about the definition of net acres. I think that the definition that we have proposed in the general plan is schizoid, because streets are either public or private. I can understand if you have a development and you want to exclude from the gross acreage the land that's occupied by the streets. But adding in streets which provide primary and direct access to a public street, to me, is redundant. I mean, if it provides access to a public street, it's got to be a private street, or maybe it's another public street, but it's a street and we defined it as such. So that take it out of there. Residential usage. Okay. We've had fights at ad hoc about densities, both in mixed use and other places. Our current proposed general plan talks about multiple family high density at 15 to 30 dwelling units per acre. That's not really
Very high.
high density. 15 dwelling units per acre, that's what you have at Marketplace,
Right.
where you have 25 square foot detached homes that have 0 affordable units. At not Iron Horse Village, I'll get to that. But in City Village, the average density is 18 dwelling units per acre, and only 100 of those units have affordable units in them. In Iron Horse Village, the average density is about 18 dwelling units per acre. There are a few affordable units, but the majority of the buildings out there are 2,000 square foot homes that don't have affordable units. The fact of the matter is, when you develop the property in the city core, what you're going to wind up with this definition is City Village across the board. Because a developer is want to come in, he is going to want to do a for sale project. He's going to come in, build the homes and sell it. No developer who is doing a for sale project is going to include commercial in that, because who's going to run it after the property is sold? The homeowners association? Oh, it's not realistic. So if you want to have affordable housing in San Francisco, in San Ramon, you have got to have higher density than 15 dwelling units per acre. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. With respect to the definition of mixed use that's in our current general plan, yes, the ad hoc committee met a number of times to talk about what mixed use is. The ad hoc committee felt mixed use was combined of a combination of residential and non-residential uses. And the only time you get mixed use is if you have both. Otherwise, if you don't have a requirement for either residential or non-residential, it's basically the non-residential that gets left out in the cold. You should probably change the name from mixed use to whatever, because it's basically whatever a developer wants to do. Now, when the ad hoc committee looked at the mixed use definitions, there were requirements for some of these mixed use areas for residential and non-residential minimums. They have disappeared from the current definitions, other than the density that's required for the residential component. I'm not sure why, but here's my fear about not putting them in the general plan. Let's suppose you put them in the zoning ordinance. Bob comes in and wants to develop a property in this mixed use area.
I gotta meet Bob.
And he says, look, I don't want to put residential in here. I'm going to build some homes. I'm going to sell them. And nobody wants non-residential. I don't want a coffee shop. Who's going to rerun it? Who's going to be responsible for it? So he says, I read your general plan. You know, there are no objective standards as to how much non-residential I have to meet. And the general plan takes precedence over your zoning ordinance. And since there's no objective standards in your general plan, I don't have to put any non-residential. And that's why I'm concerned about. And if it's good enough to put in the zoning ordinance, I think it's good enough to put in the general plan, so that we have some objective standards that someone looking at our general plan can see. With respect to the downtown mixed use south, i.e. Chevron Park, Cindy is correct. The way we did this was this original idea came up last year. And we said, wait a minute, we don't want to change the zoning now. Because some of us saw that if they were going to put residential where there was office, there was an opportunity to take the weight of providing housing off of our non-residential areas, i.e. our retail areas and our commercial areas. So that's why it never got rezoned last year. And that's why we're trying to do it this year. But I know that staff is working out the matrix to try and figure out how many units we can move off of retail and commercial and onto Chevron Park, which is why I brought up, and I have for several times brought up, how do you want to define density in Chevron Park? And I happen to believe that the idea of using it on a project, on a basis like they do City Walk, the entire property is better than on a per project basis, because as you've seen, the developer has proposed along the property Inverness Park, 1 or 2 story buildings, and to accomplish the density they talked about, they're talking about 6 or 7 story buildings like along the freeway and closer to where they want to put the retail, which makes sense. So I'm in favor of that, but we got to do it at the same time. You have to, if you're going to remove housing from any place in the city, you have to offset it with housing someplace else, regardless of housing opportunity sites. You have to do that. And so that's why we've held off on doing that till we figure out what we're going to do with Chevron Park. So that's why that property sits as it is right now. UGB. I don't think we have a date yet. Do we have a date to decide whether to keep it or not? I don't think it is, because it was taken out of the general plan.
It's in the counties.
The urban limit line, which is
Same
different
thing.
than our UGB.
Yeah, but it means the same, they can build in there.
Yeah, well, I think that's something we ought to consider about whether we want to put in the general plan or just leave it up to the city council to decide at what point, if any, we want to have a vote on the UGB. Oh. Now, I know the mayor mentioned whether Camp Parks is still in our planning area. I think it still is. One of our policies for land use on packet page 86 talks about Tassajara Valley, one of our favorite subjects. But it says that the city is adjacent to the Tassajara Valley. I think that's an understatement because it's still in our planning area. And I think the general plan ought to reflect that. One other point on the safety element, there's figure 9.2 shows 2 neighborhoods that have single access and entrance points. And it says that they're off Bollinger Canyon. I think on the map that it's off of Doherty Road down from where I live. So I think that needs to be changed. Now, maybe some of the people up here have been here long enough, because it says that South San Ramon was originally called San Ramon Village. Was that correct? Okay, well, the reason I brought it up was because, as you know, we changed the Crow Canyon specific plan to the San Ramon Village plan because of the idea that the original area way back in the 1800s was in that area. Okay. I think I've covered the historic resources valuation for pre-1978 homes. I think that the staff has done a really good job trying to create a readable, I know it's hard to do, but there are so many different conflicting policies at the state level that it's really difficult to put something together on the first go around that reads exactly the way it should be. And, you know, as a commissioner, my comments for changes and questions are designed to make the general plan not only more readable, but a better guide for the city to cut out what we don't need and really focus on what the policy should be to maintain our city as a livable space. And I think we're moving in that direction. I think we're actually pretty far there. Next time we have a meeting with staff, I think everybody should bring their sleeping bags. But we will get there. We will get there on time, and it will be a good product that the city will be proud of. That's my comment.
I want to make a comment to your mention of the four-year institution. I know there's some activity in the state legislature that would authorize some community colleges to offer four-year degrees.
Okay.
And so I would expect the DVC and Las Positas to be amongst those that will eventually offer some four-year degrees. It'll be limited somewhat, but gosh, that's a great asset because the classes are so much cheaper
Yes.
through the community colleges than they are through the four-year universities, whether they're public or private.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is a lot cheaper, and the campus over there is beautiful. They've made a lot of different changes to it. They have some really technologically advanced stuff there. And years ago, they had a program that was designed to feed people into one of the Lawrence Livermore lab programs, optics, I think it
Yes,
was.
the optics program.
Yeah.
Eric, I would honestly, and I think others are going to need to chime in. I'd like to see the university stay in there. And it's been in there for a long time. And it comes from a conversation I had with the president of Cal State East Bay a long time ago. And they look for successful stories like our community college to be a campus near there.
Well, given the reaction from my council members, I will retract my request to delete what I wrote in 20 years ago.
I have to chime in about it too. I mean, is it you or I?
Thank you for your time.
Mark?
Yeah,
You gotta jump in here. They're quiet down here on the right.
Just a couple brief comments. First of all, Cindy, thank you and the whole staff for the work on this. I know it's tough, as Commissioner Wallace said, of trying to put all this together and take into consideration all the state housing laws and things like that. And thanks for listening to our comments and entertaining our questions. I know you got some thick skin and you're hanging in there, so keep it up. I'd say with respect to the DMU South, I'm okay in general with the alternative map. I think what's appealing to me about it is this whole idea that you mentioned, Commissioner Wallace, about I think you were getting to the whole no net loss thing. If there's a way that we can take off some of the housing opportunity sites or eliminate some residential overlays or do something to where we can kind of protect our existing neighborhood shopping centers, I think that's a good thing. And if we can do this all at the same time, I'm good with that too, because I see a lot of opportunity over at what was formerly the Chevron Park area to help us in that regard and protect some of that neighborhood retail. The other thing I'd say is that, I think this, it sounds like this is going to go back to the Planning Commission for a deeper dive. And I think that's what needs to be done, especially with respect to the, things like the definitions of mixed use. And I agree, put it into get something in the general plan if we can. Let's not give people an out to where they can go, oh, well, the general plan trumps the specific plan. Therefore, and there's nothing specific in the general plan, no objective standard that that we can kind of hold developers' feet to the fire on. So yeah, continue to work on the zoning ordinance, the objective development standards, all the guiding and implementing policy. And we heard some comments tonight from the public about some of the soft language in there, that the whole idea of encourage as opposed to require, things like that. And I understand on the one hand why we might want that kind of language, but I think it gives, again, an easy out for people to avoid actually kind of doing what we really want and expect. We ran into this issue with Marketplace And, you know, it's still in there in this document here, the whole encourage integration for marketplace, you know, that between a marketplace and Orchard Supply. And I think we do need some stronger words in there. But overall, you know, I kind of echo what Councilmember Perkins and Commissioner Wallace have said so far. But good job. I think it's a great first start out the gate on this thing, at least from our perspective. And I look forward to seeing what the refined version is down the road. So
Good. I would just say, if I had my microphone. Are there any last comments before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Go ahead. Marisol.
Thank you again for all of your hard work. And I hope we just look at all of it as working together as a team here at the end of the day. I definitely would like to, what I mentioned from the outset, and I think was mentioned in sort of different branches of it by the Commissioner Ahmed and Curtis as well, is that it feels like we need a little bit more public input about the types of businesses, whether jobs are, I know when I talk to my constituents, they want their jobs to be closer to home. They don't want to have to do an average of 38-minute commute to work each way every day. I know you mentioned COVID. I understand that some of the data may be behind, but we certainly can get data from our public here about the type of work they do, whether they commute to work, and try to really meet their needs, because it's very hectic. I mean, it really impacts their quality of life in many domains, whether it's their health, their physical health, their time spent with their family when they're stuck on roads. So I really would like more time spent on developing that, so that we make sure that we allocate retail versus we have a better understanding of what type of retail our residents want. And also what kind of jobs we can try to attract here to San Ramon. And with that, for those who, obviously inevitably will still have to travel, I really, especially as we talk about developing higher density and developing the downtown core, we need to really consider about how we're going to make public transportation more accessible. Because traveling all the way across the city to get to the Dublin BART is really painful for a lot of people. So if we can find a way to start thinking more creatively of how we can improve access to public transportation for commuters who will be eventually living in higher density there. I also think climate, like I said, a climate action, a climate advisory committee would really be very beneficial to us. We've all heard about our budget, not driving enough revenue. I mean, these are things where it would be very helpful for us to have a committee that is dedicated to strictly looking at all the aspects of our aspirational goals when it comes to the climate action measures, whether it's open space, what have you, all the different housing elements. I mean, all the general plan elements that we just discussed. There's ways that we can save. And I think and we have to be resourceful. We have a lot of residents who live here in San Ramon that are very passionate about these issues. Why not get them plug them in? And that would also go back to the urban growth boundary, something that I think we should address. I mean, many people, one of the main reasons I think one of the callers mentioned, they love living in San Ramon is seeing the beautiful open spaces. We certainly have to talk about that. And how do we develop in a smart way, the city to be so that we're responsible, not only economically, but we're responsible environmentally as well. And making sure that we're not encroaching on open spaces and endangering, the habitat for our wildlife. And then, let's see, I definitely think it's great. I've mentioned this before in city council meetings. I know this is one of the things I was talking to a few people here about. I agree, workforce housing. I mean, our teachers are the people who work here, they're contributing to our community every day, should have a way to be able to live here. So, these are good people who've been doing a lot of good work for our city. And then I wrote a note and then I'm trying to read. Hold on a second. So I think it says aligning. Okay, so as was mentioned, there's not a lot of affordable housing, right? Even for some of these more mixed use housing, like a multi-mixed type of housing, meaning condos that we're looking at, or the townhouses and marketplace. These are going to be really expensive places still. So how are we going to align? We need to think as we plan local resources and how we plan around those areas to really align with what will likely be the type of community that will be living there, and making sure we're being smart about that as well. And then I think, this is just a personal request. If I can get a full page slides, that would be really helpful. The tiny lettering is extremely painful to read. So that's about it. Thank you so much.
Okay, Jean, you've been very patient.
Well, I think I, jumped the gun earlier during the questions phase for my comments. But they're still, important to me. I do want to just add one more issue that I'd like to raise attention. I'm on packet page 83. And this deals with walls and fences. And I'm raising this because as we are getting a more dense housing units, that the idea of walls and fences that are designed to minimize visual monotony has to be subsequent to safety. That safety has to be ensured first, and then we can deal with visual monotony. So, i.e. Iron Horse Village, as we had a very long discussion about fencing on that. So as we get things more compacted, safety has to be first, and then the visual, in my opinion.
Gary?
I don't have just overall concern about affordable housing. I would like to see sort of more transparent things in the general plan. Talking to people, talking to residents, every sort of resident I've talked to, they've all expressed desire for affordable housing because they want their police force, firemen, fire person to live in the city where they serve. And that's very important for us, for our residents. So.
Let me ask a quick question here. Don't we have an ordinance that requires 15% affordable housing? So that, and I know Sunset Development has committed to all their 4,500 units that they will have 15% affordable in that. And I assume that their 2,500 in the orchards will also have 15%.
Well, what about feeing out issue?
What's that?
But they can fee out of it, the developers.
They can't, there are limits on that, and they have committed to not fee out on their 4,500 units. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I always want to make sure that in general, we're saying 15%, that's correct, but I also want to make sure I elaborate and just touch on a couple of things, because the city in 2019 did adopt an inclusionary housing ordinance and a commercial linkage fee ordinance associated with affordable housing. So we get affordable housing from both new commercial development, so that does pay a fee towards affordable housing fund. There's also, as part of any new residential development, a requirement to provide affordable housing depending on the type of housing units that are being proposed. There is also catch-all provision in the inclusionary ordinance that does allow for an alternative means of compliance, which means that you have to have an opportunity for a developer to suggest an alternative. Perhaps all of the associated units may not be on site. They could potentially be partnered with an off-site property to provide the affordable housing units on another sited that would meet that development's obligation of affordable housing. So or potentially feeing out or providing a greater number of affordable units to reduce their overall number of units that are proposed. So there's a number of different ways that a developer could meet the inclusionary housing requirement, but in general, the requirement is, at least for multifamily developments, that 15% of those are set aside. Single family developments, the way that the current ordinance is written, is a 10% set aside. There is also a fee out option on the single family, which we have had some conversations through the housing element adoption that we will be updating our inclusionary ordinance and revisiting some of the requirements that are in the ordinance. And so it's one of the work items that's directed in the housing element. But I did want to put a caveat there. There are other places in the city in specific plan areas that go beyond 15%. So for example, the Doherty Valley specific plan has a requirement of 25%. In the Northwest specific plan, it's 25%. So it's not all 15%, but there are some areas in the city where we go above the 15%.
So have you done any sort of statistics as to how many people who are working in a police force, how much of them are living in the city?
I could look at and see if there is that information from our police department.
Or, just giving you an example.
Right there. Get it right.
There you go. The police chief is
You
here.
didn't need to do it tonight. Get it right.
If I could just sort of facilitate, we did not get tonight the housing element. And so the housing element would make this document a lot thicker. And so we did adopt the housing element, which comes with its own guiding implementation policies as well as work activities. So some of the comments that we're sharing on housing are also captured, I think, in the housing element tonight as well. So, this is not all of it. So when we get the final, if you ever choose, you can read a whole nother hundreds of pages on the housing element and think about those as well. So, even though we're not talking about it tonight because it's already been adopted, but we do have a housing element, which is another whole chapter of the general plan.
I also want to mention, we use some of those in lieu fees. In fact, we use virtually all of our in lieu fees to finance the Aspenwood project, which is 100% affordable. And it's 123 units. Now, that obviously happened before you joined the planning commission, but it's not trivial. Even if they do fee out some of their units, we take that money and we put it into affordable housing. So it's not like it's money that goes into something, a new park or something like that. It goes into affordable housing.
Well, one of the issues that we've raised on the planning commission about the inclusionary housing ordinance is this. As Ms. Shee pointed out, there are exceptions to the 15% rule. And the biggest one being that if you have detached single family homes, you don't have a requirement for affordable housing. Well, what happened was when the Housing Advisory Committee was meeting and talking about whether to have a requirement for affordable housing on detached homes, what people had in mind were the single family homes in Doherty Valley and on the west side, where you had 1 or 2 stories and a 4,000 square foot lot. It never dawned on anybody at that time that what we would see in quote single family homes close quote were basically 3-story 25,000 square foot townhomes that were separated by a few feet, so they didn't have to have a real affordable unit. So for example, in Marketplace, there are 40 homes being built. They are going to sell for over $2 million a piece. The figure we were given for the in lieu fee, it's about $120,000 for $80 million worth of homes.
Right.
So that is something we have talked about, revisiting that whole loophole and seeing whether something should be done about that. But as I pointed out, you look at Iron Horse Village, you look at BR6, you look at Marketplace, you're talking between them, you are talking about over 500 housing units and maybe 25 are affordable at most.
Yeah.
So
And you're absolutely right on what we're charging on our affordable fee.
Yeah.
Fremont increased their affordable in lieu fee by a substantial amount in order to encourage the actual construction of affordable units. And I suggest that maybe we look at what we're charging in our in lieu fee to either A, collect more than the $100,000, or B, push it far enough along so that it becomes more economical to build the affordable
Yeah,
units.
but we're gonna need to agendize it.
Yeah.
if we go-
So
Yes.
we took the microphone and went from Commissioner Ahmed, so I didn't finish with his.
Yeah.
comments.
That's okay. That's good discussion.
He's got one.
Yeah, okay.
Well, now it's a
Oh,
very
No,
exciting
not yet,
time.
not
Oh,
yet, not
Go
yet.
ahead.
One-
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for the great education. I feel as if I'm drinking from a fire hose straight.
Yes. That's what we do here.
Yes, absolutely. So I do have a question in terms of, do we know what are the most common barriers or reasons why businesses, whether they be non-retail or retail, don't move to San Ramon? Like, do we have a study of why people maybe choose not to go to San Ramon, but go to other cities? I mean, we could talk about trying to build our retail as much as we can, but ultimately we don't have a choice of who comes here. It's their choice to come here. I think it would be good for us to understand why they maybe are choosing maybe to go to Dublin or Walnut Creek or wherever else it might be, as opposed to San Ramon, whether it is fees, whether it's
Rent.
whether it's aesthetics. I think that would be a helpful study for us to have to be able to.
And they're not going to San Francisco, so yet.
No, they're all moving out of San Francisco. We know that for sure. Yeah. So, but I think it's good for the general public to also understand why people may not be coming to San Ramon. And so that they can also then think about how we can look at encouraging those, whether that be reduction of fees or whatever it might be, or working with owners of the land to look at rental or whatever it might be. So I think it's a great conversation, but I know that we don't ultimately have the choice of, does Panera stay with us or not? It's up to Panera. So, but thank you. Appreciate it.
And the
I see.
landlord. The landlord plays a big role.
Oh, yeah.
I think I see a
Really.
future liaison to the Economic Development Advisory Committee here. Yeah, so I'll kind of wrap up with a few comments. Of course, obviously, thank you to Cindy, to Ryan, to the consultants. I think what will be helpful, since it came up, is perhaps at a planning commission to take a look at the general plan annual report, because I think people had questions about how do we track management and monitor it. And there is a report, but it would be useful to see. A couple of comments on the economic element. There's a term MC, a consultant. I think we should define who they are. In that same section, it was packet page 11, 12. We commented on two types of jobs: local cluster versus traded cluster. And traded clusters are especially important. And I just didn't see anything in EDSP or our general plan about implementing policies that might do something around attracting those type of jobs versus local cluster jobs. So if we're going to call out that it's important, I think it deserves to have some follow-up. Around packet page 30, I saw a need perhaps for two goals that weren't there. One of them was to continue to encourage property owners to maintain and upgrade their retail centers to continue to remain viable through both incentives and ongoing code enforcement actions. I think sometimes our shopping centers come into disrepair, and I think part of that should be enhanced to include code enforcement. And specifically, it was 2.3.G-5.
I wouldn't limit it to the commercial centers or the retail centers, because I noticed kind of over by I guess it's Sonesta, used to be the courthouse.
Right. Yeah,
It's looking pretty crappy over
right.
there.
Yeah, the wording I said was property owners. I wasn't specific to shopping or anything else, but I think it's both incentives to improve and enhance, but also to code enforcement. I didn't see a goal, and maybe it's not appropriate in the general plan. We don't talk about tourism, discover San Ramon, but there might be a need for an implementing goal around there to promote that. I've already asked for, and Missy agreed that we should highlight in the plan, at least define the core. It's embedded in a number of planning areas. And I think, since it is so important right now, when the time comes, packet page 65, 67, where we define the mixed uses, I think we need to be consistent, and I'd opt for including FAR for each of the different mixed use zones, because we do include it in CCMU, but not the others. To go on record, the Planning Commission did unanimously, unless they've changed their mind in the last 3 weeks, liked the alternatives versus the primary, and we all felt that was the approach. And what wasn't shared tonight was staff now has to evaluate some 700 parcels for potential rezoning, and they need to do the math before they can come back and say there's enough room in the orchards to take all those housing units away. But we did leave that meeting on the 16th saying that we do endorse the alternatives, and we would like to be able to see the rezoning so that we can then, say yes or no to allow the zoning for not only Chevron, but part of BR1A to become, DMU South. Like others, the use of should encourage, I think, as the consultants looking at colors, perhaps we can make a stop on those use of those words and tighten them up wherever we could possibly do that. And I think that's it. And lastly, again, it was a tough document to read, but it has it all in there. Even though we don't quite understand some of the technical parts, but thank you very much to staff.
Yeah, I think you have to do the red line, blue line. I don't want to get into the colors, but folks, if you don't have what the original document is, where you're coming from, people are going to be asking for it. And that's the way it is on every other committee that's out there. You go to the air district, the climate action plan is exactly that way. So I think, it's who's going to adjust. That's what it could. Now, unless everybody's just dying to stay here a couple hours longer, I need a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Motion Perkins, second.
I'll second.
Second Alpert. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those